Hi guys, it's nice to be talking to you again. This is the third in the Whitman tutorial series. And what I'd like to do is take apart the shorter poems, the not Song of Myself poems, but some of the other ones. But before I do that, let's talk a little bit about free verse. Now, one of the things that you need to keep in mind is part of the reason I chose Walt Whitman is because he is a poet for people who maybe don't like poetry all that much. And part of the reason he's so appealing to people, even though they might not care that much about poetry, is because he uses free verse. I'm going to actually have you take a look at the introduction to free verse in here, but I'm going to talk through some of the major points that will help you recognize elements of free verse in Whitman's poems. The first one has to do with this idea that free verse, at least in terms of Whitman, mimics the patterns of our speech. You can hear echoes of Whitman in major public speeches, in pop songs, etc. It's something that our ears are very used to hearing as Americans. And so free doesn't necessarily mean free, like there are no rules. Free means it follows the pattern of our speech, no matter who we are in the great chowder pot of America. If we're here, free verse is appealing to our ears and our senses. But a couple of things that you'll want to pay attention to as you go through Whitman poems. The first one is a term called assonance. And what assonance is the repetition of similar vowel sounds. Alliteration, the repetition of similar sounds, usually consonants, at the beginnings of words. 7 silver swans swam silently south. Onomatopoeia, the use of words whose sounds echo their sense. Okay, for example, at the end of Song of Myself, when he says "yop," okay, that is actually not a real word. It's a sound. The blab of the pave. Okay, the gab. Those are all onomatopoeic words. They sound like what they are. Parallel structure. Now, Whitman is a master of parallel structure. What he does is he repeats similarly constructed phrases at the beginning of lines or clauses or sentences, one after the other. And really, the effect is to help us sort of organize things. Imagery. Keep in mind what he does is he organizes imagery, gives us visual images, gives us the sense of smell, hearing, taste, and touch. To a Locomotive in Winter is a sound poem as well as a vision poem. Mannahatta, again, a very, very busy vision poem, but there's also a sense of smell. There's also a sense of, sound there as well. The other thing, too, is that Whitman is meant to be read aloud, and the reason he's meant to be read aloud is because unless you read him aloud, you're not going to get a sense of the cadence, right? How the lines fall, how the words fall, and what the emphasis is as you read them. And so it's very, very important to keep in mind what Whitman is trying to do. Just keep in mind that free verse is not free. Free verse does have rules, but the rules depend on us. The rules are really established by what our ears are used to hearing and our brains are used to organizing. And that's what made Whitman such an influential American poet, is that he was able to do that for us. And we can hear Whitman in all kinds of other venues. We can hear him in Martin Luther King's speeches, in President Obama's speeches. We can hear him in Bruce Springsteen's songs. We can hear him in practically every American pop song ever written. The idea that we have our own unique cadence. So, just something to keep in mind as we go forward. All right. Another thing that we'll do is we're going to talk about Whitman's one rhymed poem, "O Captain, My Captain." And that is in your packet. You can take a look at it. I'm not going to go into too much detail about "O Captain, My Captain" because we've studied it and we know it so well. A couple of things, though, to keep in mind here is that even though it is really the only one of Whitman's poems we're studying that rhymes, It's important to keep in mind that just the visual image of the poem is important. Whitman laid it out this way. You can see almost three ships sailing with keels. The other thing he does is he uses repetition. And keep in mind that "O Captain, My Captain," the subtext, the backstory of "O Captain, My Captain," was the Abraham Lincoln assassination. It is an elegy for a fallen leader. And that said, it sort of encompasses three different stages of grief. And it uses repetition and all of the devices common to Whitman. The difference is subject, tone, which is, you can make up your mind what the tone is here, and also just the fact that it rhymes. What your thesis is going to be about "O Captain, My Captain" is up to you. How these things work together in order to form some sort of effect on you is up to you. But this is just something to keep in mind about "O Captain, My Captain." Okay, the next poem is, we're going to go to "For You, O Democracy." Okay, now there are a couple of words that I'm going to point out in "For You, O Democracy." Keep in mind the continent. He's referring to the North American continent, especially the United States. And when he says he's going to make it indissoluble, that means unable to be dissolved. Okay? The word comrade, camarado, that word comes up in a number of different ways in this in Whitman's work. A comrade, keep in mind, has many connotations. It's like friend, brother, compatriot, guy who has your back. It has so many connotations. It's very important to keep that in mind. The other thing too is he's personifying companionship as something that can be planted. Cities have their arms around each other. This is the great poem of personification. "I Hear America Singing." That is an ode to America, a song to America, singing its many songs. And to that extent, it establishes this idea of Whitman and cadence and music and repetition and all of those things, as well as showing people from many different walks of life. A couple of things that I want to bring to your attention is the point at which it breaks. Pay attention to the points of tension in this poem. Pay attention to the various images of people singing and how they compare and contrast with each other. Okay, Mannahatta. This is the great poem of imaginative projection. And essentially what Whitman is doing is he's telling us about New York City, the island of Manhattan. And we talked about this before. There were no Google Maps, and so he's giving us the zooming in and zooming out of what he imagines to be Mannahatta. And this is some imaginative projection that he's using. Again, pay attention to literary features. You'll see repetition. You'll see many other possible things that you can talk about. The very, 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 very deep description of how people look at street level, how the carriages look, all of those things. Pay attention to Whitman's context as someone who lived in and loved New York City. Okay, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. It starts with lecturing, and ends with the man coming out and standing and looking in perfect silence at the stars. You can form your own thesis about what the theme might be. What is Whitman trying to say about the difference between knowledge by description, the kind that you get in a lecture room or a textbook, and knowledge by experience, getting out there and experiencing life and the world. Okay. To a locomotive in winter. Okay. And keep in mind that "To a Locomotive in Winter" is a great sound poem. Trains were new. The idea of describing this new thing that can get through the coldest, snowiest winter, that can make this operatic sound right? Words like recitative, all of these are musical words, right? He uses words like panoply, which is collection. He contrasts the darkness and the darkness of the train and the whiteness of the snow. He talks about the vapor pennants. He does a great job with just a very, very basic palette of colors. All of these things I think are very, very important in keeping in mind how important this train was going across the continent. Keep in mind also to the break in the poem. He does that for a reason. Again, this is basically a tribute in praise. It's an elegy to this inanimate object. And pay attention to the cadence. What does the cadence do? Launched o'er the prairies, wide across the lakes, to the free skies, unpent and glad and strong. When you do, if you do a commentary on this one, you have to tell us what's happening to your ears. You have to tell us what's happening to the sounds, and what effect those sounds are having on you when you read it. Okay, let's see here. All right, Song of Myself we have. So that's basically it for some of Whitman's smaller poems. I'll take on Pioneers, maybe a little later. But overall, what I want you to keep in mind is Whitman's use of those elements of free verse in order to help us appreciate, see, and understand those themes. Again, your theses, whatever they are up to you. I'm just pointing out various points of interest for you. Thanks.